If you were here last week, you probably heard we're starting our new series called Stories from the Heart. Basically, what we're doing is we're looking at these old Bible stories we kind of know, and we're diving in a bit deeper. Last week, we looked at the story of Melchizedek. So if you don't know who Melchizedek is, you're probably not alone, but he's mentioned in Genesis. So he's this high priest and king that Abraham encounters and gives a tithe to and gets a blessing from. And he's this mysterious character. And we dove into him, and we saw what Scripture said and what some other ancient texts said to give us more context, and how this really revealed the heart of God is bigger than we imagine. The heart of God is moving in ways we don't even expect. And today, you've probably already picked up, we're looking at Jesus and the woman caught in adultery. So this is a really interesting story as well. We just heard it read to us, but I'm going to read it again in a little bit, and I'm going to give you some more details and kind of context around it. But this story is really good, and I think it really reveals something about the heart of God, and it can really help us. And I don't know about anyone else, but has anyone else in here ever had like a sinking ship kind of moment? Like where you just feel like everything's sinking? I've had lots. But this week, I'm not leaving this here so everyone can see how beautiful I am, so don't worry. There's a purpose with this photo. But I was distracted by this photo. And I'll hold it up for you guys, so it might be easier in the back. So this is a photo I got from Nobby State School. So I worked there as a chappie for a long time. And I was trying to work on my sermon this week, and I kept getting distracted, which is not like me at all to get distracted. But I did, and I kept getting distracted by this photo. And I kept thinking of all these great moments at the school and even these challenging ones. And I thought of this one that just really, I don't know, has stuck with me. And it was really one of a sinking ship kind of moment. And it was a tough day for me. I went to school to work, and on my way there, I was thinking, all right, I got to hold it together. I got to just, leave stuff at home. I got to hold it together. I got to be there for the kids. I got to be there for the staff. Just put a smile on, Matt. God give me strength, all that kind of stuff. And the reason I was saying that in the car on my, 30-minute drive to Nobby was because me and Kim just had recently another miscarriage. So at this point in time, we only had one child. He was our oldest son, Caleb. And we were trying to have another one. And this was like the second kind of miscarriage in a row. And it didn't feel good. It was kind of one of these sinking ship kind of moments. And I still remember going to the school, and anyone who knows me, I'm pretty transparent. Like, what you see is what you get. I don't keep secrets. People tell me I should sometimes, but I'm working on it. But the school knew everything. And I remember walking into the school and them just being curious, saying, "Oh, Matt, how's it going?" And I remember almost crying, telling them about the stuff going on. And I'm sure we all have had moments like that, where we just feel like a sinking ship. We just feel like everything is caving in on us. And I believe this is how the woman would have felt as she was brought to Jesus, as she was about to face the law, which meant she was going to get stoned. It was probably a sinking ship moment for her. She's been trying to hide this part of herself for so long, this adultery she was doing, and it said she was caught in the act, which, leave that to your own imagination, but that's probably not a good place to get caught in. And she's brought in that moment. And I'm sure it's a sinking ship kind of moment. And before we dive into this story and kind of pick it apart a bit more, I want to talk about some of the context around it. So the first thing we need to remember is earlier manuscripts did not include this story. Verna made us aware of that, and anyone can be made aware of that. If you go to your Bible or look on the Bible app, it usually has a bracket or a little, asterisk, and it will tell you that. So some manuscripts have this story, some older ones do, but they include it as an extra story at the end of the Gospel of John, or sometimes include it in the Gospel of Luke. And you can kind of feel this story doesn't really fit naturally, because if you're reading the story, Because if we go back to how the Bible was made, there weren't chapters and verses and all that. It was just a story. So it has a flow. If you're reading the story, the flow kind of gets messed up in a sense. It would flow better if you take this out. But it's just important to be aware of that. And I think it's important to be aware of that because it helps remind us that there's a rich oral tradition during the Gospel's formation. So as the Gospels were coming together, there's a culture that didn't really care too much about writing things down. That's not how they passed down stories. That's not how they taught. It was storytelling. And there's a rich history of that. So acknowledging that, hey, this wasn't in early manuscripts doesn't mean we should discard it. I think there's a reason it's there. There's a reason the author puts it in there. It just reminds us there's an oral tradition going on. There's stories circulating and spreading while the Gospels are forming. And people are piecing it together. And that's what we kind of see from what we know about this story. We also need to remember that Jesus is in the temple during the Festival of Tabernacles. So this is a big Jewish festival. So lots of people are there. A big crowd with lots of eyes on Jesus would have been there. Because Jesus kind of has his following now. He's made an image for himself. People know about him. There's good and bad things being spread about him. So he knows when he goes into the temple at this moment, that's a big holiday where everyone is. All eyes are going to be on him. And the next thing we need to be aware of is there's a symbolic prophetic gesture in this story. And we sometimes miss it. So I want you to keep your eyes out for that. So with all of that in mind, I want to go through this story now together. Oh, there we go. So I just want to read John 7, verse 53, to all the way to chapter 8, verse 2. And this is what we read in the beginning of the story again. They went each to his own house, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives early in the morning. He came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. And this is an interesting little phrase because all the people came to him. If we look at that and some of the wording in Greek and all the fancy stuff that will bore lots of people, and I'll pronounce it all wrong anyway, so we'll just simplify it. Basically, this is symbolic. All of Israel is symbolically present. That statement's trying to allude us to that. I mean, it doesn't mean literally all of Israel's in the temple. I don't think they would have all fit. And who knows, maybe they could have and they were standing on top of each other, but this is symbolic. This is a gesture that all the people symbolically are present for Israel. This is a big moment. Jesus even knows that, and it's why, before he goes to the temple, it says he goes to the Mount of Olives. He goes to recharge. He goes to sit with God and be alone. He knows a big moment is coming. So it's not some small crowd. It's a massive crowd, a massive gathering. It'd kind of be like at the Carnival of Flowers that we have coming up in Toowoomba. Someone might say, all the people of Toowoomba are there. Well, literally, not all the people of Toowoomba are there. Like, that wouldn't fit. But we all understand that means most of Toowoomba is there, right? Any important council member or important, government figure is probably there. And that's what we get with this kind of statement. And it's important to take that in and to recognize it. But let's keep reading and see what happens next in our story. And this is what we see. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. Placing her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" They're testing Jesus here against the law. And we can read that with our eyes and think how horrible that someone who's caught in a moment like that, the punishment would be stoning. I'm sure most of us in the room would think that's a bit barbaric, right? But back then it wouldn't have been. Back then that was the law. I'm sure there's kids, you know how kids play cops and robbers and those kind of games when you're little? I'm sure there was kind of like stoning the adulteress kind of games as well that boys played. Any excuse to throw a rock, a boy was probably taking it. So they're testing Jesus here against the law. This is what, in a sense, the law of the land is. The law of God says to stone this woman. What do you say? I think it's big to slow down there, to be aware of all this stuff happening. Because all the people are there. It's a moment they got to set Jesus up to fail. Like, yes, we can get some dirt on him. Like, we can do something. We got to test him. So they test Jesus against the law. Let's keep reading to see what Jesus does. And we know they said it to test him because it tells us in the next verse. But this is what we read. This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. Now, before going on and before trying to speculate, what Jesus was writing, I want to leave that aside. There's good speculation we can have about what he was writing. Maybe he was writing their sins. Maybe he was just doodling. Maybe he was drawing an ant, building an anthill or something. Like, who knows? But I want to leave that speculation because I think there's something interesting the author is doing here. He's trying to create a symbolic moment like the prophet Moses. Because if you think about Mount Sinai when God gave the law, all the people were there, right? All of Israel were there. Moses goes up the mountain. And God wrote the 10 Commandments with his finger in the earth. There was a rock, but still, it's the earth. That's why the 10 Commandments are such a holy thing in Judaism, because God wrote with his finger. It was personal. And the author's kind of setting up this moment in this story, the way he's retelling this story to us, where in this moment there's another symbolic prophetic gesture where Jesus is stooping down and writing in the earth, symbolically claiming his divinity with God. Let's keep reading to see what happens after he does this. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. I think this is a pretty gutsy move on Jesus' part, if I'm honest. Has anyone in here ever been really, really angry? It's probably just me. I get angry all the time. But you know how when you're really angry and you just feel like you're right? Like no one can tell you you're wrong. You're in your anger. I'm right. So Jesus in this moment, with all these people all angry trying to test him, basically tells them, if you are perfect, throw the first stone. Like that's gutsy. I feel like if I would have been one of those angry people, like I would have got a stone and whop. Yeah, I'm perfect. Look at me. Like people caught up in their anger, and in this moment, Jesus does this gutsy thing of saying, he's drawing for a little bit. He stands up and he's like, yo, if you're perfect, you get a stone and beam it. And then he goes back down to draw. That is gutsy. And I think it's interesting that he goes back to this prophetic gesture of stooping down and drawing in the dirt. Because I think the people who were there accusing him would have picked up on this gesture. They would have known what Jesus was doing. That's why I don't think we get included what Jesus wrote, because that's not important. It's the gesture behind it. It's the symbolism behind it. And that's why I think one by one you have people going away. Starting with the older, because, older folks are a bit wiser sometimes. Us younger folks, we're not wiser sometimes. We think we know better. So I think that's fitting why the older ones kind of pick up on some of the gestures, some of the stuff going on, and they walk away. And you kind of have the younger ones waiting. And they shift away last. To where if you can imagine, because the story told us all the people were there, so there's still a big crowd around Jesus. Somehow in the middle, there was these accusers, adulterous lady who was caught in the act, so probably a bit disheveled, and Jesus. Slowly, the accusers all drift away, the story tells us, and you're left with a big crowd, and in the middle, you have Jesus and this woman. And I find what happens next really interesting. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more." And I think there's something interesting we always forget, and I found it interesting. It was kind of like a nugget of joy that just popped in my head rereading this story. But Jesus doesn't label her sin. I mean, we can all read through the context and say, oh, it's adultery, of course. She was caught in the act of that. She's disheveled. That's what they're wanting to stone her for. It's that. But Jesus doesn't label it. He doesn't say it's adultery. And if I think about it, if someone's in the wrong and, sometimes we say we're not in a place or, who are we to call someone out? I feel like it's pretty safe to say that, if anyone can call someone out for doing something wrong, it's probably God in skin. I feel like you're justified if you're God in skin to be like, yo, that's not right. But he doesn't. He doesn't label the sin. And I think this is really interesting, and this reveals something beautiful about the heart of God, if we're willing to take notice of it. It reveals the heart of God is personal, desiring an authentic relationship with each of us. Because we see that in this story. If it wasn't about a personal relationship, he would have just labeled what it was. But it's not. It's personal. He didn't need to label it. Because the woman knew, and he knew. No one else needed to know. Because the heart of God is personal. And I believe it desires an authentic relationship with each of us, as an individual with who we are. And I believe this part of the heart of God, it's enabling the heart of God to be full of grace. Because God wants such a personal relationship with us, he's able to have so much grace for us. Because I know if it was about Matt being good enough, that probably would never happen. Like, I emceed a wedding last night. I'm pretty sure I messed up saying at least 5 things, maybe more. And then I'm American, so who knows if anyone understood me sometimes. So it's not about being perfect. This is why God can be so full of grace. This is why, like in our story, he's able to hold space for this woman caught in adultery. Doesn't condemn, doesn't judge, doesn't say, how dare you, none of that. Says, I don't condemn you either. Go and sin no more. He holds space for her while her accusers are there attacking her. Why, by the law, if we look at the law, the letter of the law was she should have got stoned. It's horrible. I disagree with it, but I'm just saying, if we're looking at the story and we're following the story along and we're taking things in, that's the letter of the law. But Jesus holds space in this moment. Because the heart of God is personal. And the heart of God is timely. And what I mean by that is, I'm pretty sure this woman would have been shaking in her boots when Jesus stooped up again. after everyone is gone. She's disheveled. She's been caught in adultery. She's done something wrong. She's probably thinking the reason Jesus was drawing is because he was just warming up his throwing stone hand so he could beam in some, really hard stones. But God offers this timely gift to her. Says, I don't condemn you. And I feel like in that moment, that woman would have had a weight just go off her shoulders. Seeing God in skin say, I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. It's a timely gift. And I think the reason God does that is because the heart of God is personal. It enables all these things. And I talked about my sinking ship story earlier, which distracted me this week. But I guess with just keeping on that story, I remember how the staff that day told me to take it slow. Had some stuff on, but they were like, just hang out up here for a bit, Chappie Matt. Get yourself together. If you need to go home, let us know, but just, you go get yourself together. And they showed me grace, and they held space for me. Because that wasn't the only morning something happened in that story where I came up upset. But every time I did, they held space. I believe God was using that school and the people within that school to show me his love. And then I think about one of the most beautiful gifts the school ever gave me. Eventually, my son Gideon, Kim got pregnant. We were having another boy. And it was a cross-country day. And I knew nothing about what the school had planned, but at the end of the cross-country day, they pulled everyone together and all the parents, and they had a package, like a baby bundle. And it was all these baby supplies. And it was some shirts, all the little baby stuff, nappies, because you need nappies. And gift cards to buy more nappies. And they just congratulated me, and I think it was just so beautiful to have that moment. Just unexpected. And it was such a timely gift. Because I just went through so much, Kim and I both, trying to have another child. And then we got there, we're about to have it. And it was just good to get that gift from him. And it's something that still impacts me today. And I firmly believe while I was at this school and wherever I go, God's always with us. But I think God was using that school to show me something amazing. I think he was using that school to show me some things about the heart of God. So I don't know what your story is. We all have stories. We all have different things we've been through or are going through. And I don't in any way ever want to act like I know what you're going through. Even if it's the same thing as something I went through. I don't know because we're different. But I know the heart of God is personal. It knows. God's there. And he wants that personal relationship. And in that space, there's full of grace. So if you made mistakes, if you've done the wrong thing like me, that's awesome. I mess up lots. But God's grace is bigger. And God's full of grace because he's a personal God. He's able to hold space for us in those moments when we don't know what to do. And he's able to give us the most timely gifts ever. Because our God is a personal God. So whatever story you're going through, whatever season you're in, I really hope you can remember that the heart of God is personal. That it wants to sit with just you. That Jesus came to this earth. He did what he did for all of us, but he did it for you. For you. Just the way you are. He's a personal God. He doesn't expect everything to change with a magic wand. He's willing to sit with you and do the dirty work. Be full of grace at the times we're trying to figure it out and get it right. Be able to hold space with us and to offer us those timely gifts when we need them. And it's important that we remember that, especially with the world as the way we see it now. Because we've got to remember we're not alone. Our God's a personal God. And I'll just close in prayer, and then Rachel's going to come up and play our last song. God, I thank you for who you are. Sorry, I wasn't crying, that was a cough. God, I thank you for who you are. I thank you for your love and for your grace. I thank you that your heart is a personal heart who desires an authentic relationship with each one of us, meeting us where we're at, full of grace, with an ability to hold space, and a way to offer us the most timely gifts that we never expect. I pray that you help us to remember that as a church, as followers of Christ. You help us remember that you can do those kind of things for us. You help us dive into that. You help us dive into you more and more. You enable us to allow your love to flow through us where we can do that for other people. Where we can hold space for other people, where we can be full of grace for other people and offer some of the most timely gifts for others. And we just really pray and ask you for that. In your amazing name, amen.